What's up, Battle Riders, and welcome to another tips and tricks video. Today we're going to be talking about Varesh, the Eternal. Now, I think Varesh has the highest finessing potential in Battlerite. So if you like finessing people, Varesh is your champion. Let's go over his battle rights and then we can get to the tips and tricks. For round 1, I basically always take Devastation. This battle right is borderline broken. It makes it so easy to apply your right click, it's not even funny. And you can right click the orb and Judgment will spread to nearby enemies. But if you think their melees are really going to ruin your day, you can take Zeal. This gives them another crowd control option. For round 2, you can take Celerity, which gives you more survivability and a little bit more damage, or my personal favorite, Unlimited Power. Paired with other battle rights, Unlimited Power becomes really good. Round 3 really depends on how the game is going. I personally like to take Ruin, but Wonder is also pretty good if you need the extra survival. I find myself not needing Fracture that much, so I don't really take it. Again, for round 4 you have some choices, but in my opinion, Synergy is way too good to not take. It makes keeping your Judgment and Corruption active pretty easy, which can have a large impact on the game, so it's always my choice. For round 5, I always take Accord. This makes it so you can use your allies to continue your ult while also healing them. So now you can use enemies, the orb, and your allies. Before we begin his tips and tricks, let's do some house cleaning. Varesh has a bunch of buffs and debuffs, so it can get kinda confusing. So let's clear those up before we begin. The blue ring is Varesh's Corruption. Corruption reduces the damage and healing done by 15%. This is pretty significant. You can pop Corruption by using your E or your R ability. Popping Corruption snares the enemy and also heals you for a small amount. The purple circle is his Judgment debuff. Judgment increases damage taken by 15%. Popping Judgment silences the enemy and also deals a small amount of damage. Okay, now that we have that out of the way, let's get to tip number 1, which is when to pop each debuff. Now, playing Varesh is a fine balance between keeping his debuffs up or popping them to take advantage of their abilities. A huge mistake that I see Varesh players make is that they will try to E or R someone who has both debuffs on them as soon as they get both debuffs. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because if you pop it right away, you can't actually take advantage of the debuff at all, and the effects of popping them aren't always really worth it. Now, if you look at the clip playing in the background, you'll see that there's no real reason for me to use E or R here. I have a healthy amount of health, and the Varesh doesn't really need to be silenced at all. So why not minimize his damage done and his healing done, while also maximizing the damage he takes? In this situation, the only reason you would actually use your E or your R is if you were guaranteed to hit it and you could reapply your debuffs again. I personally had a lot of trouble learning how to use this trick, because I saw shiny rings and all I wanted to do was damage. However, as soon as I started waiting a bit, I ended up doing a lot better as Varesh. And while we're on the topic of R, don't be afraid to use it offensively. Sometimes it's better to pop your debuffs and get in the enemy's face, then sit back and give them room to breathe. Tip number 2 was already kinda covered earlier when I was talking about his battle rights, but I think it deserves its own tip. You can use the orb to bounce your right click if you took that battle right in the first round. This is surprisingly strong when you take it with Synergy. If it wasn't already easy enough to keep up your debuffs with Synergy, this makes it so much easier. Also, if you're playing against Pestilus, make sure you take this. You can hit his queen to bounce his right click onto him, and it's glorious. That Pestilus will hate you forever. Next, let's talk about his EX abilities. His EXE has a pretty significant knockback and can work really well if used properly. There are a few cool things you can do with it, like knock the orb in a certain direction or knock enemies into the fog, but I personally find myself not using it very often. I tend to save my energy for my ult or my R. His EX right click is something that I use even less. I mean, the heal is kinda nice on it, but its main point is that it applies both debuffs at the same time. In my opinion, keeping both debuffs applied isn't really that hard, so I don't ever really use it, but your mileage may vary and you should definitely experiment with it. For tip 4, I think it's important not to panic with Varesh. You can kinda let melees chase you because if you have your debuffs on them, they're not doing that much damage to you. Yeah, the reduction isn't something like 50%, but it's not nothing either. And you'd be surprised with how much damage you can do by just hitting your right click, left click, and your E. It'll keep you alive while they take tons of damage. And I get it, Varesh is kinda fragile, but just try not to panic. This is also important because if you panic and use his counter at the wrong time, it can get him into some really bad positions, especially when it puts the enemies in between you and your allies. So you kinda have to think about his counter intuitively. Similarly, although Varesh is less positioning dependent than someone like, say, Lucy, positioning for him is still really important. Getting caught out as Varesh with your pants down is certain death. So there's another balance with Varesh between panicking and being too aggressive. Personally, Varesh has been one of the hardest champions for me to learn, if not the hardest. But in my opinion, after playing him, instead of thinking that you have to love Pain to play him, I think he's one of the best champions in the game. He's just punished really easily when you make mistakes. And one last final bonus tip that I will give you. If you're serious about playing Varesh, make it a point to remember which debuff gives you health and which debuff does damage and silences. Remember, blue will give you health and purple will silence and do damage. I know it sounds simple, but making this distinction in your head early, you'll teach yourself not to panic when things don't really go your way, and you'll know when to pop each debuff depending on the situation at hand. Anyways, potatoes, that's all the tips I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed the video and I hope this helps you play Varesh better. If you liked the video, feel free to subscribe and like, and let me know how you build and play Varesh. And hopefully soon, I'll see you guys in the arena.
You crazy mother...